Martyrs cannot be silenced. Written and illustrated by Naro. An audio recording. Pirate radio broadcast. The author's preface. A few words about Naro may help the reader better to understand his work and what motivated his creativity. Naro and his family survived a hate crime in Pineland, East Texas at the hands of the Ku Klux Klan, March of 1973. But let me interrupt this preface for the introduction to this book. Martyrs Cannot Be Silenced, a Sword and Shield production. Perception is the greatest deception. And I know that my thoughts appear delusional, but perception and deception breed reception. The introduction. Martyrs Cannot Be Silenced represents some of the most intense collective conspiracies ever to be manifested into one literary composition. I tend to agree with this assumption, even though I might tend to disagree with its presumption, only because I do not want to be absorbed by those conspiracy consumptions of intoxicative functions. So I will dare to ask a question of myself, in order to attempt to avoid the possibility of inducing psychological eruption, seduced by the corruption from displaying way too much intellectual rubbish at my own current junction. Herein lies the question. Would you like to some spicy mustard on your question? Sorry, I deviated from the question. How do we as a society represent ourselves without being duly represented by ourselves in such a menagerie of intellectual diversities, without succumbing to those intellectual absurdities? Is it an absolute desecration of obsolete indesecrations that we are made aware of our foolishness, of which I stand full of bullish, rubbish, random ideas? Yet the soul of the idea is very simple indeed. Is what we are told to disbelieve really what we are to believe? Is it not better to formulate a reactionary opinion with inaction or with an open mind and with clear eyes, so that we can be fully armed with righteous information and yet be true to our own lies, without suffering from the self-righteous indignation of being possessed by those bullish, rubbish, random ideas that bind us and blind us to be openly oppressed by the suppression and the repression of it all at the hands of all of these bullish, rubbish, random ideas that dare to defy our free will as they oppress, suppress, and downright repress without so much of a thank you very much or even $1 in recompense. Now is not the time to fall into a psychological mind trap full of intellectual mind craps. Now is not the time to be or not to be, and destitute ourselves full of soul chaps because you are told to be what you weren't meant to be. Now is not the time. Not everyone in their right minds can set their standards so low to the ground that they adapt to the whims of others by becoming obedient Stepford wives, For I am not to be forsaken by adopting the mindless pursuit of secular peer pressure. Let this be the time that we endure, for courage and for moral recompense's sake, not to be manhandled by a stranger disguised as a friend that we just met at a party or social invite. No, the event is not to be evaded. No, amused to be bemused. Ha 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 ha. But why not a true friend be used? So he can lead us towards the safest path, from a moderate to a less stable existence, which may indeed provide us the most comfortable means to understand that the information by which we are told it is better to be to disbelief than to be scolded by popular in-crowds is far more socially acceptable than the numbness of dumbness that we are told not to believe in such unpopular, outdated norms. My gosh, man, what have we become? What have we been reduced to? Where are we in our lives that we dare to be other than ourselves? Whom are we in your life as we dare to risk being subjected to the sarcastic whims of a dastardly beatdown given by a degenerated peer pressure, rather than to reject that metamorphosis from private self-respect to gushing from our wounds of public peer pressure put-downs, from whom we are demonized and patronized as if it were our own being the manicured subjects prepped to be ridiculed for public entertainment? Oh shit, no. Oh shit, no. Only because we are guilty of trying to be just mere creatures of our own truth, and that being true to ourselves. We is truly worth being just being, instead of validating those unacceptable, intrusive, confusive, contrusive data of us not being the being we are not meant to be. How our haters tend to use our demonization into a must-read online book about us. So in our broken mental state that they are pushing onto us and onto others whom serve as their hand clappers and are clones of their former self-dignity, filled with empty pages of acceptable thinking that morally devolve us from what they involve us into, that which they and only they are making us evolve into for they, so that they can enter into the room of applause and become celebrities of the pushers of gay acceptabilities, so they can empower the freedom to be a Harvey Weinstein or not. And are we not slaves of popular in-crowds, beaten down morally? But do they even notice us in their intellectual days, whom we are scandalized and morally bankrupted for the displeasure of being acceptable in their 15 minutes of fame? Are we not to be psychological slaves? Are we forced to enter the norm of your usual crowd-pleasing beatdowns by publicity seekers? And whom are we, by selling themselves out to be, demonized by being the crowd-seeking haters of saleable bestsellers, according to their rigid guidelines of professionalisms and intrinsic outbursts of creative restrictions? Or is it not better to be better and to be rejected by the butter of another, with social peer pressure muttered clunkers, seeking and demanding obedience from us? In order to ratify such ignorant intellectual arrogance for public acceptability, as they are all smitten as members of the secular elitists in crowd. For I am better than you thinkers, of whom they are by presuming that they are whom they aren't. But I risen out from the ashes of public acceptability, from an empire of nations, determined to make us all happy clones of dire decadence. The nerve of them! Blimey! But are we mandated to be miserable scouts of crumbs by the secular residents of such an empire of nations, that we are being fed their crumbs, and they be feeding us into accepting the phenomenon of mass appeal imagery? Yet. They are sadly the popular ones addicted to drugs. Weed, beer, sex, and the list goes on. The bastards. So where does that leave us, the begotten? Where are we, and where we are, is to better be served by becoming tools of social engineering, and not slaves of the social engineering tools. Oh, cast me not into the whims of my own undoing. We seek to be catering to one's own proper master, that being our own good health, happiness, and prosperity, we are not promoting foolish, word-of-mouth rubbish in order to be clones of hogwash, petty, pity, sex crowds, for any number of amused atheistic acceptabilities. My gosh, man! Dare we drink from the drunk of the drink of the social skunk that makes up an everyday life of non-believing tyrants, whom are clones to be idolized and saturated, whose categorizations of Bible creationists as mad are just glad pursuers of the jolly for the folly of hand-clapping, crowd-pleasing, bored monkeys of secular joyrides, trolls. And for those rude, insecure atheists that attack Christians and free speech that they deem as unacceptable Christianity, I laugh madly in their faces. Ha 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 ha. But if we are to be demonized for entertainment's sake, with lewd words and imaginary, carefully crafted by profanity pushers, then by whom, are bearing down on us, like vultures amassed upon a high hill of iniquity, so that youth are reduced as mere ATMs for the Red District club owners, money-seeking drug pushers, liver-destroying beer companies, wardrobe-malfunctioning fashionistas, and gay trolls. Whom are they but social seekers full of deceitful epidemics, and paparazzi seeking charity-donating celebrities? Then by all means, fiend! Let it be so. What it is, so it is, meant to be that which is to be demonized. How revolting to be revolted by the revolters. So cast away thine web, O ye workers of iniquity. Cause your audience are dying from a slow and painful death through AIDS and all these other epidemics, and the destruction of brain cells through weed, and that is their activism, which depends on the condition of their aching body and of their decaying mind? Oh, so forget their black souls, for heaven is not what they seek. So let them be damned as atheists, who want the freedom of the option to abuse teen girls if they so desired. Cast them away, as of thy own will be done. Thy own will be done in drugs and sexual weakness. I get you, I understand you. They have no will to be free. For it is said that slavery to sin is but a cold dish of revenge, best served while it is hot, tsunami hot. It burns thee to rot. Humankind was built upon the needs of the many, whose individual faith in one nation under God was enough to manifest a destiny, whose fate be justified, was reserved for individual success sanctified, where such ideas of hard work ratified, family and God made us completely electrified. Yes, 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 man, I concur. Where our products and messages and behaviors will be spread from man to man into the bosom of woman and her own kind, the child that she bore from the womb of her family obligations. Unto our nation's God we be true, just like the United States Constitution that promotes such basic civil rights, freedom, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. When do we become so far-fetched in our own simplicities that we forget just how simple the First Amendment really is? Freedom of speech is not rocket science, math gone wacko. Why did we allow their fruitlessness of rebellious youth to decay our own bowels decades ago? Just because they misconstrued morality to mean oppressive doesn't mean that the anti-rape laws are suppressive, or that anti-sodomy is guilty of gay bashing. And anti-child molestation does not mean gay men preferences should supersede morality laws that prohibit what may or may not be natural in the animal world. How do we not count the characteristics of free-thinking peoples? By numbers? On one fist? One, Christian principles of faith are contagiousness. Two, the fact that Christ delivers redemption and forgiveness from sin causes us to empower such righteousness into the very stables of the judicial system's own restrictions of our own government, to prohibit slavery and segregation, and yet dares to include as punishment for those lawless deeds, to include probation and equal representation under the law, equal protection under the law, and such laws are to be represented with expedient urgency for justice' sake. And let it be thine own truth be done with that I share this with my readers. You too can have judicial repercussions, seldom to be lacking those legislative overrides by the court's interpretations of the effects thereof. And 3, that is the very fabric of our democracy of this great republic, that the very fabric of our democracy of this great republic can change the peoples of the world, move mountains to get from whence they came to thence they are, can coin currency of Americans as a globally acceptable form of money exchanged for goods, from Spain onto Mexico, to Alabama onto Europe, to California onto Asia. We find through military and diplomatic intervention, we can police the world, and under international law and treaties abstained, we can punish a man abusive to his own daughter overseas by merely dropping a bomb on his sorry ass. But that happens not gradually, but by tasting the blade of American swords. We can empower the power of American might, not by from one twisted turn of simplicity at one dramatic moment. We can embrace the child that slaves reversed. We can dominate the thoughts of refugees, curse it. We can salute the persecuted and liberate the downtrodden by legislating American principles that are rooted in the same Judeo-Christian principles that define how justice moves, how justice grooves, how justice proves, how justice rues the day, generation unto generation, outlasting the wicked man's advances through a civil war-torn nation by providing humanitarian aid through military actions and covert reactions. For such a contradiction would be amassed by the hypocrisy of its own inaction, or by the attacking of the legislated flu of uneducated tyrants, whose brutal attacks desecrate every vulnerable citizen of that providence. We impose swift action of the United States of America. We are the world power of the United States of America. We are the force that counters the epidemic of tyranny, the epidemic of injustices, whether abroad or within our own borders. We gracefully beat down the traits of corruption and abuses. For love is the most important, because it is the principle that makes sense of the United States of North America, and that permits us to employ the greatest intervention ever known to mankind, that being hope, peace of mind, global charity. Dare I admit to you what you omit from me? When American soldiers served war and rescued victims of Iraq from ISIS on a mountain through peace begot the peace, tears were shed, not because we made them taste the blade of our swords, but because we gave them love from Christians unto Muslims. That is why unto such we are driven by the battle cry of passion into service by providing the less fortunate, the persecuted, the oppressed, the brutalized, the victimized, from sunrise to darkness. This is why we are the hope for the modern-day refugees of war-torn nations. We change what happens in their dying country. The way it does is the way it wasn't. The name freedom given to that one democracy is a dramatic moment in overcoming an epidemic of hate, empowered by a hateful government. When everything can change all at once is the reason why martyrs cannot be silenced.